Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Art of Prevention podcast. And yet another special guest today, coming back all the way from my undergrad, is where we met. And I'm on today with Coach Nick Aguila of aguilaperformance.com. And I've known Nick since I was an undergrad. He was a graduate assistant at Adams State, and we were both training together. We were working out together. We were slamming beetroot juice for the dietary nitrates back then in order to try and get some performance benefits, which I think did help out. And now Nick has been a coach at a couple of different universities. Today, we're going to be talking about how we can improve our performances and increase our training load, training volume, etc., without getting injured. So I'm really excited for this podcast. Nick, why don't you give us a little bit more about your background, some of your coaching experience, and now what you do with really a wide variety of athletes, ranging from the weekend warrior trying to break 4 hours in the marathon to, some Olympic hopefuls and people like that.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me, Nick. It's been a while, so it's good to chat again and have me on here. But yeah, I got kind of infused into this coaching route in my undergrad when I was at UConn. Just the idea of human performance and pushing your kind of self to the limit was like really motivating for me, which kind of led me to Adams State where we met. And yeah, I mean, after that, I was a few colleges, as you said, Central Connecticut State University, Southern New Hampshire University, and American International College. Um, so yeah, and now I do not coach in the college ranks anymore. I decided to start my own coaching business where it's been great, working, I get to work with a whole diverse set of individuals. As you said, those who are trying to get their, get themselves out the door, running X amount of volume, just staying consistent to an athlete who's one of the top milers in the UK. So
Yeah, so obviously you've had a lot of success with the weekend warriors and those high-level athletes. Uh, Tell us about, are you able to speak to like talking about Callum at all?
yeah. So Callum Elson, he's the Distance Project on social media. He's done a great job at kind of promoting himself and his brand. He was a football player out in the UK and university, and got a scholarship for grad school here in the States. And
Hey, we need to specify that's American soccer. Yeah.
yes, American soccer. Yeah. Um, so he came out and yeah, I mean he was like a 15-minute 5K guy, trained himself through COVID before coming to the States, ended up running pretty well, ran low 14s in the 5K, and which is about like, 435 per mile, and yeah, and then I kind of inherited him when I went to AIC, saw some good turnover, good ability in the mile and the shorter distances, so we decided to focus on that. And yeah, now he's trying to trying to improve his mile time and see if he can get on the British Olympic team this year.
Yeah, so you really took him from that kind of just raw talent to progressing all the way to becoming an Olympic hopeful and doing really well in the mile, which is an event that he didn't even see himself doing, right?
Yeah, no, he always had thought he was going to be like a 10K half marathon guy, which there's still time for that. He's got plenty of years ahead of him for those events.
I feel like that's the kind of opposite story from most people. I feel like a lot of people come in and they're like, "Oh yeah, man, I'm gonna be a miler and a, middle distance runner." And then it's like, "Yeah, sorry, you just don't have the turnover for it. So you got to move up to that 5K, 10K pretty fast, you know?"
Yeah, typically. I mean, I think he'd run like when he was playing soccer out there in the UK. He had always kind of like participated in some local runs and road races, but never like seriously. So
Now, what did that process look like when you quote unquote inherited him when you were at American International College? I mean, you had this kid who trained themselves during COVID. They ran low 14s in the 5K, which is like that's pretty solid. And doing that on their own is a real testament to his own like intellectual and coaching capacity. But how do you take somebody and over, 5 years or so, develop them from this raw, like piece of talent to being one of the top 1500-meter runners in the UK?
yeah, so it's a lot of patience. I think it could have been really easy for me to kind of overload him with, oh, you need to do X amount of mileage, you need to do X amount of workouts at X intensity, to be able to hit these times because you can do it. I always take the long-term approach, and that approach is consistency first and foremost. If you're consistent over a long period of time, then good things are going to happen. You just compound that fitness week after week, month after month, year after year. And you just, ultimately you don't really know where you're going to be. All you know is that if you compound that fitness and stay healthy, you're going to be better from where you started. And that was kind of the biggest point that I kind of like drive into most of the athletes that I work with, consistency over volume over intensity. That's kind of like the three tiers or pillars of success.
Okay, so doing a decent job over a long period of time is always going to be better than doing a really great job for a week.
Exactly, exactly. I think, anyone can run like a really awesome workout week after week, have, 100-mile week, 120-mile week in them, and boom, you're on top of the world. But there's a lot of negative that can come from that in terms of like injury, setting you back. In the end, it's not worth it. So you kind of take the athlete with where they're at that point in time. You want to consider like their training age. Callum was not, he had only been really running for like not even a year at that point before he like broke 4 minutes in the mile. He had run, but like in terms of like training at like a certain level, like he hadn't really been training for all that long. Like he was fit, but translating that to racing is a lot harder. And like a lot of props to him. Like he's just a really good racer. And that's something that as a coach is a lot harder to teach.
So he had, oh wow, I didn't even know that he had only been really focused on running for a year and then went sub four in the mile. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And so, how did that alter some of your training strategies when you have somebody with this incredible engine, this incredible, natural gift, but maybe not the highest training age? I mean, was he working out with like, your second or third groups or anything like that? Or, how did that change your thinking when it came to loading him in terms of intensity and volume with workouts?
Yeah, so it was kind of like somewhat of a hybrid approach with him. I mean, AIC had a good fair amount of talent on the team. When I got there, also worked with Clement Fayon, who was a 800-meter runner from France. And we managed him to get down to like 148 in the 800. And then Ezra Mutai, who was a 1340s 5K runner, by the time that we had left. So there was a good mix of work of athletes that he could train with and work out with. Ultimately, it was like teaching him how to be patient, how to contain his excitement for like certain sessions, not trying to beat the workout, which is a mindset that I think a lot of athletes, especially like very competitive athletes, have, is like trying to beat the workout. Like, oh, coach says, I have to run 330 Ks. And then it's like, oh, but I'm going to run 325 Ks. And then, that's just compounding fatigue, and kind of in the same way where you compound fitness and weeks over time of consistent training, if you're compounding that fatigue in that kind of way, then you're just digging yourself a hole for the future.
Yeah, you're getting rid of your competitive drive and just like letting it all go during the training cycle as opposed to on race day.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So what is the sign to really hold those athletes back, you know? And at what point do you maybe change up and increase some of that intensity and some of that volume with those athletes? Like, let's say they're saying, was he saying that the workout was really easy, or was he just able to get into that really competitive mode and then try to beat the workout?
Yeah, I mean there's certain mindsets that you can move forward with as a coach. I mean, first and foremost, each session kind of has a general underlying theme to it of what you're trying to get out, whether you're working on a certain type of system, or the athlete's mindset. With Callum and a lot of athletes that I do work with, I like um, working with rate of perceived exertion. So on a scale of 1 to 10 RPE, how you should feel relative to that reps distance. And I think that's really important for newer beginner athletes so that they can understand themselves and their bodies and not be too ingrained with the watch and what the splits are telling them, or what the 400-meter reps that they're running, and being too ingrained in that. I think that can also lead to just poor workouts and poor consistency over time. So yeah, kind of mixing and blending the intensities over time as the athlete grows older and understands themselves at a training age standpoint, then you kind of have that trust with them to be able to handle certain workloads appropriately without having to kind of like be on their back all the time of like, you know, this is how it should have been run ultimately.
Mhm. And I really like that utilization of mindsets and having specific goals with training sessions. Is that something that you really incorporate a lot as far as like at the beginning of a workout, you might explain to them, okay, these are the times that you need to hit, but this is the overall focus and mindset that I want you to have during this workout.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, especially with a lot of the remote clients I work with, it's important to like, because I'm not there with them. And I don't know how they slept the night before. I don't know how their eating habits are. Some have families, stressful jobs. So I have a general sense of like the intensities and percentages of like what their effort should be. But there's so many factors that go into that. It's not just a math equation where you just, drag and drop, plug in, boom, it's done. It's important to kind of let the athletes know what it should feel like, how it should feel like, and use the metrics to analyze after the fact. So um, only using subjective like feeling can also be like a little wonky, because at the end of the day, like, we're humans and we don't really like pain. So like, you might not be pushing yourself as much. So that's why I like kind of inputting in the notes how things should feel, follow-ups to like how it felt, and kind of better understanding, how the athlete handled that session.
Yeah. So, and then I bet with you, when you develop that trust and that relationship with that athlete over time, you can figure out and tease out which of those athletes you kind of need to push and say, I want you to be at a little bit of a higher RPE. And then there are also the people like Callum, where I'm sure that you were more like, I actually want you to ease off the gas pedal a little bit here.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's definitely athletes that I kind of have to nudge a little bit, their RPE scale is a little skewed, so I have to kind of, turn it up a notch a little bit. So maybe in their mind it's a 1 out of 10, but in my mind it's like a 1 out of, I don't know, 11 or something, or 9, whatever the case might be, and adjust accordingly. So
They're trying to turn the dial up to 11 every workout, huh?
yeah, exactly.
Spinal Tap reference, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned some of the intangibles, some of the things that you can't necessarily fit on a spreadsheet. What are some variables that you look at with your clients, whether they be the weekend warrior or the Olympic hopeful, as far as like things that can modify the training intensity and volume?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that's like lifestyle. I mean, I really take into consideration the athletes ultimately like what they have going on. Because at the end of the day, like as you know, like stress is stress. Um, whether it's running stress, family stress, relationship stress, work stress. So it's really important to kind of understand where the athlete's coming from. You could be working with nurses who have 12-hour shifts, and they're working from 6 to 6, 7 to 7, whatever it may be. And that's not really a day to get like a really hard workout or intensity session in, maybe even the day after, if they have the day off, it might not be the day to do that either. So understanding the athlete and where they're coming from is like really, really important. And that's where like the conversations come in, and making those adjustments accordingly. If someone's like, hey, I've been traveling for work, flight got delayed, I didn't get in until 1 a.m., maybe they have a workout the next day, then it's like, all right, just, we'll adjust things around. Take the day off, cross train, go for an easy jog, do what you need to do to feel good, whether that's day off or doing something, and then we can always adjust the schedule accordingly.
Nice. Now, on the flip side of that, we also have like the spreadsheet, right? The hopefully linear progress that we're trying to accomplish with our athletes to meet that goal. And now we know, I'm sure you know very much more than me because you're the one in the coaching realm, that physiology doesn't work on that linear time scale, right? Um, it's more that undulating, weird stuff. And then the aggregate and the average line might be that nice average linear progression. But what are some of the things that you use metric wise to increase somebody's training volume or intensity? I know there are things like the 10% rule where you don't increase by more than 10% in your volume or intensity over a given week or period of training, etc. What kind of things do you use with your athletes to increase the volume and intensity without making them more susceptible to something like an injury?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't really use that 10% rule. It's like it really depends on the athlete at the end of the day. Like, you know, it, so the reason I don't is you take an athlete, let's say they're coming in, they're new to running, they've been doing like 15, 20 miles a week, like for the last 4 months, they're super excited. All right, now if you apply the, kind of like that, those types of rules that are out there, then they're going 22 miles, then 24 miles, and then 26, 27 miles. So that's just in a sense it takes away from other stuff that they could be doing. So what I like to see is first a block of consistency. Like if they're able to handle a certain um, training volume, then from there we can add certain intensities. Or if they're super low on the mileage spectrum and they have time to do more, then a pretty standard good progression is okay, let's bump you up. Let's add a few miles here and there. Maybe let's bump the long run up if they're even doing a long run at that point, because maybe they're not. Um, and and then stay there for a little bit, maybe sprinkle in some intensity and see what they can handle. At the end of the day, it's like for each athlete, they're they have their own story, their own history. So it's important to kind of take all of that into consideration. I mean, there's some coaches I've actually talked to who just think like running and fitness and progression is math. And it is to a point, but not really. I was listening to someone talk the other day, and I think it was like a triathlon podcast or something. And one of the speakers there referred to coaches as like modern day Picassos, like you have to think of yourself as that, and like the canvas is the athlete, and you have like all these different things, right? Like different paints, like what kind of paint,
Mhm.
like kind of art, and no painting is going to be the exact same regardless of how you try to replicate that. And like ultimately that's like the art of coaching and making sure that athletes stay healthy and are consistent over a long period of time.
I love that. And there's a reason I didn't call this podcast the science of injury prevention.
Yeah.
Because you do have to take that athlete where they're at, and you have to look at all of the variables that don't fit on the spreadsheet, if you will. And I bring that up because when I was going through school, obviously, I'm a sports or rehabilitation type of chiropractor. So I work with a lot of runners, and I take a lot of continuing education about gait and running, etc. And that's just a term that's like thrown around a lot because you know, oftentimes like athletes won't have a coach, and maybe that is or maybe that isn't the reason that they got injured, is because they're messing around with those variables a little bit too much, or they've got all these life things going on and maybe their outlet is running. And sometimes, they have a bunch of life stress, and then they're like, I'm going to just take out all of my stress on the run. And then they're going to go and massacre themselves on a massive run, even though they've had all this lifestyle stress. And then you know, instructors will get asked like, well, what should runners do? And then they go, well, they shouldn't increase their volume by more than 10% a week, or they should only do 10% a week. But there are all these other variables that we have to take into account in terms of intensity, lifestyle stresses. And I like what you mentioned about just having a consistent block. It's like maybe they should just stick at this number of miles per week for 3 weeks and then mess around with doing some higher intensity strides or some higher intensity intervals, or just staying there and just having a good consistent block of training and say, look, you will get more fit. Your body will respond and adapt to this, even though you're not upping your numbers. Would you say that's a pretty accurate thing?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. It's also funny being like a mostly remote type coach, because like, as an athlete, when you hire someone to help you, hopefully achieve your goal, sometimes as coaches, the you want the athlete to feel like they're getting their money's worth ultimately, right? So like as a coach, you could be inclined to just always kind of hammer them, like, oh yeah, yeah, like that athlete feels like they're going to be getting their money's worth, or they're going to think that like this is a good program because they're on their hands and knees every week, they feel like they got a good workout in. And it's funny because like I take this approach of like, okay, you did this marathon or you did this race or whatever. All right, we're gonna do just easy runs this week. Like, or we're gonna take the week off. And it's just like, like uh it's a kind of it's just funny like mindset where it's like a lot of times in reality, athletes do need that person to tell them, hey, back off, relax, don't push yourself. You need to recover, you need to rest, you need to recoup, what you gain from this block rather than, you know, pushing forward and plowing forward with whatever plan has been set.
Yeah, I think it's also difficult to wrap the head around the fact that once you do a really hard workout or you do a marathon race for the next 24 to 48 hours, or even a longer period of time, depending on the intensity of that workout or race, you are literally less fit than when you started that race or workout. Like, and you can think of it in this context. If I raced a marathon today, one, I wouldn't be able to walk tomorrow, like just because of my training status right now. But I am
I
literally,
wouldn't be able to finish one, so
yeah, there'd be some walking in there, for sure, there aren't enough goo packs in the world for me to go 3 hours marathon right now. Uh, but if I race that marathon today, then over the next week, my fitness is literally down like much less than my fitness is right now. And that's because I've given my body this massive stressor. And now my body needs to adapt and compensate, hopefully in a manner of super compensation, so that I'm then more fit in the next week or 2 weeks later. But because of that workout, I don't get fit tomorrow. I get fit a week from now. And because of this training block, I don't get fit the week after that training block. I get fit another training block away. So we have to really take a step back and not lose the forest through the trees, which I think is something that you've been talking about this entire podcast. And that really relates to your process as a coach, right?
yeah, 100%. I mean, as I kind of stated earlier, real briefly, it's just those three pillars is like the foundation, like the consistency that needs to be first and foremost, and then volume, the second tier, and then the intensity, third tier. And once you have been able to handle that on a consistent basis, you know, those three week after week, and then ultimately with performance, at the highest level, like then you can start playing with, all right, now I'm going to start adding more to that when you can, right? So it's going to be, adding that and recovering from that. That's the key. You don't want to add to that if you're not able to recover from certain sessions. So, the recovery is as we have been stating here is like the big key to that. Now, that's not to say like you should just like recover, 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 recover. Like I've been recovering for the last year and a half, right? So
Yeah.
that doesn't mean I'm going to run a PR in the mile tomorrow. So,
Covering for a
uh,
long time, man.
yeah, the long taper here. So,
Yeah, that compensation's coming, dude. Um, Now, with this and with consistently also comes modification of training. So I'm sure that you've had those times and you craft this beautiful training block for an athlete, and then they get 1 or 2 or maybe 3 weeks down that training block, and then they go, "Oh, my hamstring is pretty sore. Oh, my Achilles is kind of flaring up." I know me and you can definitely relate to that kind of issue. How do you modify the load for those athletes? Um, Maybe you could say, speak to a more generic injury or something like that. Like, what do you do when you get that notice, that call from the athlete? Like, hey, I did the workout today. I felt pretty good, but I've also got this thing going on. Like, how do you take that in? And then how do you change that athlete's programming?
yeah, for sure. So, I guess, oh man, the amount of times, more so in the college, ranks where I've outlined this beautiful plan there where everyone's going to be national champion, and it's going to work out smoothly. It just like never happens. So it's yeah, so it's a lot of learning and experience that has kind of come along over the last years. But yeah, that's it happens. It happens. And when that happens, my biggest thing that I try to kind of hone with the athlete and understand is like what is the level of pain? Is it something that is truly hurting or is it sore? I think sometimes that gets misinterpreted. Um, Ultimately, like I have a pretty big rule of thumb, and that is if you're doing the exercise and it's not getting worse during the run and doesn't get worse after the run, then we can kind of stabilize and see how, and then work, with prehab, try to, you always have the athletes who just don't do any prehab or lifting or any work. And then all of a sudden they get the smallest thing. And it's like, okay, like 3 hours a day, I'm going to start doing stuff, you know? So, but yeah, so that's pretty common. And then if typically over time and you have that consistent base, the athletes kind of working on themselves, working on, you know, various band work, getting in the weight room, whatever they need to be doing. Maybe it's physiotherapy, who knows? Um, you know, Sometimes that just goes away. Other times it's like, it's definitely not feeling better. So what we need to do is we need to really back off, either take a couple days like where you're just cross training or going on a walk. Like I'm a big advocate and fan of just keeping, blood flow to the body, through the body, to the area. That's like the most important thing, as you know, like with recovery and injuries. So not just kind of being a couch potato and moping. That's, you want to be active and you want to be doing something to help you get back to doing what you love to do. So, yeah, every person's different when it comes to that. Some people have the time to get to a gym, some people have the bands. Typically, most people that I work with are willing to get certain things that they need to be, that they should be getting, um, you know, uh, to help with certain injuries. So, yeah, it's just adjusting the volume and making sure that's not getting worse, as long, if they can do the activity, do the activity. If it's getting worse, then cross train and do what you need to do in terms of rehab. So I'm not a doctor, so I'll push them to whoever I need to push.
I'm not a doctor either, so that's fine. Um, uh, so I really like what you described about, is it getting worse during the activity, but also you need to check in with yourself after that activity, especially when we talk about stuff like tendon injuries, whether that be to the iliotibial band, to the patellar tendon or the Achilles tendon, all pretty common runner complaints. Oftentimes with tendon injuries, we'll even have this warm-up effect where you start the run and you're like, God, I can barely get a couple steps in here. And I'm like limping through the first 5 minutes. But then between that 5 and 10 minute mark, my gait starts to get a little bit more normal. And then after 10 to 15 minutes, it actually feels pretty warmed up. And then I can go and massacre a workout. And then guess what? My first step out of bed the next morning, I can barely walk.
Yeah.
So that looking at not only like you described, not only how do you feel during that run, but then checking in with yourself after that run to see, how do I feel now? Did I worsen my symptoms and did I worsen my function in that joint or tissue, tendon, etc. afterwards? I know I've done my fair share of cross training. What are some of your thoughts surrounding cross training? How have they changed since you and I were spending hours together in the training room and sitting on the bike at Adams?
I mean, I like biking. So, I mean, I love when people are out on bikes. So, if someone has a bike and they're willing to get out on a bike, and let's say it's like, I don't know, not an Achilles tendonitis, and they can do that activity, then that's great. Have at it. Um, Ultimately, I know I have a lot of runners who love the elliptical which is great. I mean, it kind of mimics it's a little more specific to running. Um, but sometimes, like depending on the cross training like activity that you decide to do, sometimes it can actually worsen what's going on. Even if they're not really weight bearing activities. So, if that's the case, if they have access to a pool, then you're going to be a triathlete next year. So, but it's yeah, ultimately the cross training activity um is up to the athlete because I want them to enjoy it. At this stage, I work with a lot of folks who are just like, have families or have full-time stressful jobs. If they're not able to run, then that's almost more of a stressor for them because they just really love to run. Um, so just making sure that they're able to do something that they can enjoy and help guide them through that is all part of the process. Um, Ultimately, I've been, fortunate enough to not have like too many big injuries, with anyone that I have worked with. So, um, that's I guess that's a good thing. So,
Well, I'll knock on wood for you. And I think what you said about going for a walk is actually really powerful too, because when we're running, like one of the best parts about running is going out into hopefully some nature or going out and like literally moving our brain and body through this three-dimensional space that we call Earth, right? And that's a huge stress reliever. And when you don't have that stress reliever, then you can have just all of the stress from those stressful jobs, from family, from kids, et cetera, just compound and you don't have that outlet. So, there are going to be physiological benefits as far as like improving blood flow to an injured area, et cetera. But that is really like the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the physiological benefits of just going for a walk and being in nature. So, I mean, that's been shown to reduce cortisol levels. It's been shown to reduce blood pressure. It's been shown to improve, symptoms of anxiety and depression, especially if it's out in nature. So, just that simple, like going for a walk, we can't underscore the value in going out and just walking. So, I think that's great that you mentioned that. Now, in your athletes that are able, where they have one, access, but also number two, time. What kind of stuff are they doing in the weight room?
yeah, so some athletes decide to kind of like do their own program, which is I'm 100% for, like go for it. If you know what you're doing, have at it. I definitely like to do personally if athletes want me to write them a program, full body lifts, not too long in the weight room, and just foundational work. Learning how to squat, learning how to do deadlifts. Big fan of the trap bar deadlift.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, varying the squats. You're not maybe starting. If I have an athlete who's never squatted a bar before, you got to start just body weight squats, see what your flexibility is. Maybe move to a goblet squat, and then, maybe an overhead squat with, some light, milk jug or something. I don't know, like anything just to get in your body in those positions and build that network, and appropriate firing pattern. So that's really important. And then ultimately, when athletes get to that point of being able to handle back squats, front squats, trap bar, even, I'll have athletes lift heavy doing bench also. It might seem counterintuitive, but there's high level athletes, testosterone is, weight room is good for your testosterone and endocrine system. So if you don't want to beat your legs up too much, doing a couple heavy bench press movements is good to help with that. So and then doing obviously like single leg work, whether that's the lunging variations, and power exercises. So yeah, I mean, single leg work, snatching with the dumbbell is like a really, really good exercise for most people, coordination and power production. So, yeah, I think that's all really, really good stuff. If they have the time, we'll try to write something that's 45 minutes. You're in the weight room, in and out. If you don't know what you're doing in the weight room, then it might be a little longer at first, or if you're constrained to time, then it's like, hey, we're literally just going to work on one or two exercises until you're like comfortable with that, then we'll advance forward and start adding. But ultimately, like it's form, um, getting the form down and understanding how you're supposed to move.
Beautiful. And I think weight training for runners is something that's definitely undervalued. And I think even what you talked about with the bench press for runners is super crucial because we're working with human beings here. Like if you're someone who has a family, has kids and all this stuff, like you're not just a runner. Like you are a human being. And thus you are susceptible to many of the pathological pitfalls of human beings. So even people who are very active in endurance sports, like can still have like low bone mineral quality in the late stages of life. Like osteopenia and osteoporosis are huge detractors from someone's health span as they move along in life. So I think like especially for like our, female sporting populations, going into the weight room and literally like doing some bench press can be amazing and incredible for that endocrine system where we're trying to promote hormonal factors associated with the laying down of bone and bone matrix. I mean, the most common, one of the most common areas for an osteoporotic fracture is the distal radius. So it's called a Colles fracture. So yes, if you are a runner and you're not going in and working your upper extremities and telling your body to lay down and giving it the impetus to lay down bone mineral in your upper extremities, in your spine, in your lower extremities, because I mean, I hate to say it, but running is not the best way to build bone. Like people think, oh, I go for jogs, I go for walks, and that's what I need to do in order to build bone. And it's like that's not true. Like that is not the level of stimulus necessary to build up bone. Typically, our osteoblasts and our bone sensing cells are receptive to those stimuli for about 10 to 15 minutes, literally. And then we have a drop off in how sensitive those cells are to that stimulus. So if you're going out for, 15, 20-mile run, then you're getting, stimulus to those bones for 15 to 20 minutes, maybe one or two, or maybe even 3 miles. But then after that, that sensitivity really drops. So I love that weight training is one of the priorities for you and your athletes. And I love that you start them out where they're at and then slowly try to build them up. And then even giving them something like a bench press, I think is like something that some people might think of as out there and unnecessary. But I totally agree with what you're saying, where this can be a great thing, not only for their running, but for them as a person, you know?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, just like building I don't like to view runners as runners. I don't like to really, segment people, put them into little boxes, right? You're an athlete at the end of the day, and athletes, you need to be coordinated, you need to be strong, you need to have endurance, you need to have speed, right? So kind of mixing that all together is really important to build the body up and create who you want to be in the future. So
Yeah. And I feel like there's this somewhat pervasive myth in running, which I'm like on a crusade against, where runners should be doing low weight and then high repetitions, right? So this is like the runner that you see with, literally like 5-pound dumbbells doing like bicep curls or like doing a lunge with an 8-pound medicine ball. Like that might be effective for like some coordination aspects, but as far as like the coordination in terms of muscular strength and motor unit recruitment, like that 8-pound medicine ball really is not doing you too much good. So,
mhm.
what kind of things will you give people? I know you mentioned full body exercises like front squats, back squats, the trap bar deadlift, also a really great personal favorite of mine. What do you give people in terms of like set and rep schemes? Because I know that you were into lifting for running and injury prevention back when we were running together at Adams.
Yeah. So I really like to stay in the low rep range, anywhere from like 3 to 6 ultimately. If I'm starting someone out and trying to get someone to just understand a certain pattern, I will go to 8 or 10, but that won't be very heavy. But then as we progress and their form's fine, I'll really cut the reps down and maybe I'll just increase the sets. And ultimately, like if I can get an athlete to almost like what would be termed as like a 5x5 program or some iteration of that, 5x5, 5x4, 5x3, whatever it may be. I think that's kind of your sweet spot with lifting. And then in terms of what you can accomplish with the lifts is going to be, you kind of have this whole toolbox of goodies that you can kind of choose and pick from. Um, but yeah, even like explosive lifts, like, I'll have some, athletes and marathoners who, are trying to run, 340 in the marathon, and hey, let's go to the weight room and let's learn how to snatch. Let's grab a 10-pound dumbbell and let's like just get that motion down. And then let's build that weight up. Let's do, let's get up to 6 sets. Maybe we're doing 2 or 3 on each side. And that's just a really good workout coordination. Quick movement and compound that with maybe some sort of you know, just heavier lift. That's more focused on the muscle recruitment, the motor unit recruitment, recruiting those big muscle fibers. So
Yeah, and there's a really famous physical therapist named Gray Cook who developed and sort of founded the selective functional movement assessment. And he has this really famous quote, move well and then move often. And I think that keys into what you're talking about. If you have somebody who has a training age of 0 for the weight room, then we do need to take a couple of steps back and just work on the movements themselves. We don't want to load somebody up with a really, really heavy back squat if they've never back squatted before. But I think that is a really crucial piece. So will you like look at videos of your clients like trying to do a squat and stuff like that and let them know if they're ready, or how do you kind of navigate those waters?
yeah. So I'll send like training videos, and like I try to get the athlete in a mindset of like, okay, envision that you're doing this, and like everyone, you think you're doing it perfectly, and then you get the video and it's like, you're all crooked. So it's happened to me even, I do it all the time. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm crushing this lift. And then sure enough, I look at myself and it's like, oh gosh, that was terrible. But yeah, I'll have athletes send videos when they can. If and I tell them to, like, listen, like if you can get a chance, send me a video before I feel comfortable enough giving them certain weights for them to try to get after.
I know this is a little bit off topic to our current conversation, but let's say I'm an athlete and I'm training myself and I'm trying to teach myself how to do like a back squat. What are some things that you look out for in that video, in that, back squat or something like that, that lets you know that somebody's moving decently well, like decently enough?
Um, you want to make sure that their body's in line.
Mhm.
Um, that's not to say like, you can have a little movement and angle adjustments here and there. That's perfectly fine. I mean, I think at the end of the day, like, there isn't the perfect squat. Some athletes are just limited with what they can do. So understanding what those limitations are is crucial. And then from there, seeing how, okay, can you get down a little lower? What's your flexibility with your ankle? I'm not a big fan, of lifting your heels up, from, having a platform under there for too long. Maybe that's like a good introductory, like, okay, this is how it should feel and this is how it should be. But, that's it. Maybe just 1 rep, see how it feels, looks, whatever. Um, and then make those adjustments from there. But ultimately, you don't want, you want as clean of a line as possible from your shoulders, hips, feet. and and just trying to make those adjustments, getting the athletes to visualize themselves, any cues you might have, I have are, try not to be slouched over or looking down. You really want to keep your chest up, your head up. Um, and I mean, for example, like a squat, I really like I forgot where I heard this from, but if you have your feet planted, your full foot should be on the ground. And as you're going down, you kind of want to like almost feel like you're corkscrewing your heels into the ground while your knees are coming out. So it's a lot easier to be in person to try to explain that to someone. Um, but once the athlete starts to get a feel for what that is and looks like, then you can definitely progress from there. And then there's variations of the squat. There's high bar, low bar, um, but that's probably for some more advanced individuals.
Yeah. Or modifications for other individuals too,
Exactly.
Yeah, I always love getting like really good cues because sometimes that one little cue can create that light bulb moment for individuals where they're like, oh, I do need to somewhat feel like I'm twisting my feet into the ground, which is going to activate your external rotators. And then there's actually like a fascial like continuum between those external rotators and your glutes and your feet. So like there are obviously massive connections between the feet and areas like the hip, pelvis, low back, etc. And that's something that, I work with a lot of my CrossFitters that come in to see me in my office is because they don't necessarily have those cues correct. But being careful with these things and like slowly building up, and then it's okay to get help from a trainer or a physio, etc. What's usually your threshold for like an athlete that's dealing with an injury or dealing with one of those little aches and pains? And let's say it's a remote client, they're in the middle of a training block, and they're like, yeah, Coach Nick, I've been, doing some of the resting, I've been doing some cross training, but I'm still having this discomfort. Like, what leads you to saying, hey, I think you need to go get this evaluated by a healthcare professional? Because that's
Yeah, I
a
mean,
tough waters to navigate sometimes where it's like, oh, I think it's gonna go away. And then like 6 weeks down the line, it's like, I guess it's not going away?
yeah, I mean yeah, 6 weeks definitely. Like, if it hasn't, if you haven't seen anyone by then, definitely go see someone. I think it really depends on like what type of injury or thing they're feeling. Ultimately, the biggest things with running are like, as you kind of stated earlier, are like an IT band or maybe a piriformis or Achilles tendonitis or post tib. So if something like that, doesn't go away within like a week, ultimately, it's like, you should probably maybe go get something done on it, get some active treatment, whether it's going to a PT or, doing some sort of like dry needling or whatever it may be. Like, you know, uh, I can only say as much, and the athletes and the clients have to be the one to actually do it, and if they're willing to, spend those resources, their resources on that. Um, Ultimately, I think it's important to have a team that surrounds you at the end of the day. Like it's not just me and the client. Like, if they have a nutritionist that they want to talk to, great. By all means, go at it. I'm not a nutrition, I don't have, the licensure of like a sports nutritionist, or a DPT or whatever it may be. So it's like, go and see who you need to see. I can offer advice on how to navigate that. So like, yeah, I mean, if the limit is like, okay, let's say I can't even walk or it's hard to walk, I'm limping for like 3 days and go see someone. Like that's kind of a no-brainer, right?
But
But if
you'd
it's
think, like one would think that's a no-brainer, but trust me, like it's not always the case.
yeah, yeah, for sure. For sure. So
I mean, I've definitely seen people where it's like, Yeah, I've had this discomfort. I haven't been able to really like run. I've been running through it, but it's been happening for like, I don't know, 6 months. And it's like 6 months, and as far as like some of the processes that occur when you exchange from an acute pain syndrome to a chronic pain syndrome, that's not just something that's in the tissue. Like that's not just tissue damage. There are literally neurophysiological processes, so processes that occur within your brain, your spinal cord, within the nerve that go to that tissue that will facilitate what we call the chronification of pain. So it's really important for us as like coaches or clients or practitioners, et cetera, to really like figure out like, okay, when do I really need to like get this checked out? Because once you go from an acute pain to a chronic pain, it's not just that tissue that's involved there. You're involving the entire sensory system and even the emotional system, because pain is a subjective and emotional experience.
Mhm.
So I would say like for people that are dealing with these pains and things that are limiting their performance or limiting their workouts, like it is something that it might be worth getting an evaluation, might be worth getting some active treatments and therapies that can help get them out of there. Because I mean, just from my experiences with like Achilles tendinopathy, if I go out and I try and increase my volume or my intensity too quickly with running, I will off like, this happened to me a couple of years ago when I actually first moved out to Colorado and I was running on a lot of hills. I was trying to increase my volume because I had more time because I wasn't, in class as much and things like that. And, I felt my Achilles flare up on me a couple of times. And it wasn't just the Achilles that flared up, but a lot of the previous like emotional things that came about as a result of me being an undergrad and not being able to do training and do runs with my team and have that like social aspect. All those emotions came flooding back, and I was like weirdly depressed and like having all these negative emotional experiences. And then I just realized that like, oh, this is like coming about because of my Achilles. Like our emotional states and these like tissue states, they're very much interrelated with our human experience. So, I love that you're kind of on top of that with all of your athletes. And I think that's a big thing, is knowing when to go to the physio or when to adjust training so that we don't allow the chronification of these pain syndromes. I'm sure you felt that too. I mean, I know the Achilles stuff was kind of a battle for you back in the day as well, right?
Yeah. That was big. So, yeah, not knock on wood. I haven't had too much Achilles stuff since then. So,
Nice.
um, maybe I learned a lot. Who knows? Or I'm not running as much.
One can only hope that we learn from our previous experiences, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, wrapping up here a little bit, Nick, thank you so much for your time so far. But at the end of each one of these episodes, I like to bring up Benjamin Franklin and this really like nerdy anecdote about how when Benjamin Franklin began or started or founded the Philadelphia Volunteer Fire Department, he has this not infamous, but this famous quote: "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." So we've been speaking for almost an hour now about a wide range of topics, from programming to weight training to coaches as Picassos. Now, if we could condense all of that information into a couple minutes, what would you say that your ounce of prevention would be to athletes or coaches or clinicians that are listening to this podcast?
Yeah, I mean, get your sleep and enjoy what you do, like that's like kind of the basis of it all. Like if you're not enjoying it, a lot of negativity and bad outcomes can come from that. So just embrace your journey and sleep is like the number one drug that you can give yourself to give yourself that advantage and keep progressing. So
Gosh, what a perfect way to sum up. Sleep is so incredibly important. And then, yeah, I'm not even gonna expand on that stuff because I think that you put it down so succinctly. Sleep and enjoy what you do. So Nick, if someone's interested in working with you or learning more about what you do, where can they find you?
Yeah, so they can go to aguilaperformance.com. That's AGUILA performance.com. And there they can just navigate the page. They can see what we have to offer. And if they're interested, they can fill out, the contact form or reach me at nick@aguilaperformance.com. And yeah, I mean, all consultations are free. So, if you want to get started with coaching or interested in it and whatnot, just reach out.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Nick, and we'll talk again.
Yeah, appreciate it.
And now he's doing freelance coaching. So you can get all of the awesome coaching that you can from Coach Nick and his other highly qualified and experienced coaches at aguilaperformance.com.